changes. Consistency is a powerful yet often overlooked force. It's not about doing something over and over for the sake of repetition. It's about the profound effects small changes, consistent actions have on our trajectory over time. In many ways, consistency is the unsung hero of success, quietly compounding in the background while the loud changes, flashy moments of achievement get all the attention. But here's the thing, those moments of success, the big breakthroughs, they are often the result of consistent incremental effort, the daily changes. Seemingly insignificant actions that pile up like bricks, forming a foundation of progress we rarely notice until we look back from a vantage point of achievement. Changes. The reason consistency is so powerful is that it's cumulative. It works on the principle of compound growth. Imagine you're investing money in the stock market. Changes. If you invest a small amount regularly, even though the return on each investment might seem modest, over time the growth multiplies. The same applies to your efforts. Each day, change, each moment you choose to act in alignment with your goals, you're making an investment in your future self. At first, the returns may feel small, perhaps even invisible. But as time passes, changes, the results begin to speak for themselves. That's the beauty of consistency. It doesn't just create results, it creates exponential growth. This principle of compounding effort is something the human mind struggles to fully grasp. We are wired to crave immediate gratification. Changes in a world where we are constantly bombarded with quick rewards, social media notifications, instant messages, and fast food. We tend to undervalue the slow, steady path. But it's in this very impatience that we often miss the mark. Success is rarely an overnight phenomenon. It's a product of consistent action day in and day out. Changes. The person who practices their craft every day, who works on their body, who nurtures their relationships, is stacking wins that over time build an unshakable foundation. Changes. Consistency also works on a deeper psychological level. It creates structure and certainty in an otherwise chaotic world. When we engage in something consistently, we signal to our brains that this is important, that this is a priority. Our minds are creatures of habit. They thrive on routine, on patterns, on certainty. This is why changes. When you start practicing consistency in any area of your life, you begin to notice that your confidence grows. You feel more in control. The act of showing up, even when you don't feel like it, changes, builds mental resilience. You begin to trust yourself more. You stop waiting for motivation to strike, and instead you make motivation irrelevant by simply doing what you said you would do. Changes whether you feel like it or not. But here's the catch. This requires patience. This is the part that trips most people up. We expect immediate feedback. Changes, but the beauty of consistency is that it doesn't offer quick validation. It asks for your trust. It asks you to put in the work without knowing exactly when or how the results will manifest. Changes. It's like planting a seed in the ground and walking away, not knowing if it will bloom tomorrow, next week, or next year. But the key is that with consistency, it will bloom. Changes. We live in a culture that often prioritizes the big win or the instant breakthrough. But in truth, those moments of dramatic success are often the result of 1,000 small, consistent steps. There's a philosophical depth to this. Consistency forces us to confront our own impatience, changes to reconcile the desire for instant gratification with the reality that meaningful change requires time, effort, and perseverance. In a world that tells us to chase the next shiny object, consistency asks us to stay grounded, to focus on the long-term vision, and to trust the process. In the end, the question is not whether you can be consistent, but whether you're willing to be. Changes. Are you willing to make the small, daily sacrifices for the sake of something greater? Are you willing to stay the course when the results aren't immediately obvious? Change, because consistency is the bridge between where you are now and where you want to be. It may not be glamorous. It may not be exciting. But it's the quiet changes, powerful force that will propel you forward in ways you can't yet imagine. So remember this. Changes. Success doesn't come from bursts of effort or from waiting for the perfect moment. It comes from the steady, relentless commitment to show up every day, no matter how small the step. Changes. Every choice you make, every action you take is either building towards your future or detracting from it. Make consistency your ally and let it be the quiet engine that drives your success. Because when you force yourself to be consistent, you unlock a power far greater than any momentary burst of motivation ever could. Motivation is often revered as the spark that ignites our efforts. Changes. It's that sudden burst of energy that propels us into action, the feeling that drives us to tackle challenges, set goals, and make change. We've all experienced it, the motivational speech, the book. Changes are the moment of inspiration that makes us believe we can accomplish anything. But here's the truth. Motivation is inherently unreliable. It's fleeting, it's unpredictable. Changes. And it's often tied to our emotional states. One day we feel on top of the world, and the next we're dragging our feet. When we rely on motivation as the cornerstone of our actions, changes, we set ourselves up for frustration, disappointment, and ultimately inaction. Consistency, on the other hand, is something you can control. It's not a fleeting feeling. Changes, it's a commitment to show up, regardless of how you feel. We've all heard the saying, you don't have to feel motivated to be productive. And this couldn't be more true. Changes. Motivation might get you started, but it's consistency that will keep you going when the motivation fades. Change is the problem with motivation is that it's a reaction to an external trigger. It's something that comes from the outside and affects our internal state. When we rely on this external spark, changes. We are at the mercy of our environment, our mood, and even the weather. This is why people often fall into the trap of waiting for the right moment to act. They wait for inspiration to strike, changes for the perfect day when everything aligns, and only then do they take action. But the truth is, those perfect moments are rare. Life is chaotic, unpredictable, and filled with distractions. Changes. The idea that we can only act when we're feeling it is a delusion that prevents progress. Here's where consistency shifts the equation. It asks not for motivation, but for discipline. Changes. It's about developing a framework in which you act despite your feelings. You build the habit of showing up every day, whether you're motivated or not. Think about it this way. Change. If you wait for motivation to strike before working out, for example, you'll likely never make it to the gym. But if you commit to a schedule, no excuses, changes. No, I'm too tired, or don't feel like it, you begin to build a muscle of discipline that doesn't care about motivation. You just do it. The irony is, the more you show up, changes. The more motivated you actually become, the act of doing creates its own energy. This is the psychological power of consistency. It's a feedback loop that strengthens itself, changes. When you push yourself to act despite a lack of motivation, the act of doing becomes the reward. There's an intrinsic satisfaction in following through on your commitments, changes, and proving to yourself that you can rely on your own discipline. Over time, you develop a belief in your ability to persist, and that belief becomes a source of motivation in itself, changes. But there's another layer to this. In our modern world, we often mistake motivation for passion. Passion is something we talk about a lot. It's what we think will drive us toward our dreams, changes. But passion, like motivation, can be fickle. It's fueled by emotion, by circumstances, by our desires. But passion alone won't carry you through the hard times, the inevitable setbacks, changes, or the tedious work that comes with achieving something significant. Passion is often a spark, but it's not the fire that keeps burning. What keeps you going when the passion wanes? It's consistency. Changes. Consistency is the quiet force that carries you through the mundane, through the plateau periods when passion is nowhere to be found. Changes. It's the steady rhythm that moves you forward when the road is long and the end is not in sight. The act of being consistent, even when your heart isn't fully in it, forces you to confront a deeper part of yourself. It builds character, it builds resilience, and most importantly, it builds trust in yourself. This doesn't mean you won't ever experience bursts of motivation or that passion won't play a role in your journey. But when you understand that consistency is the foundation of all meaningful progress, you become less reliant on the fickleness of motivation. You create a structure that allows you to move forward, no matter what external forces are at play. In the end, motivation is just a starting point, a brief surge of energy that's here one moment and gone the next. Consistency, however, changes the force that sustains you. It's the invisible engine that keeps your efforts moving even when motivation is nowhere to be found. If you want lasting results, stop waiting for motivation to strike. Commit to consistency and let it be the steady, unshakable rhythm that moves you closer to your goals. When you force yourself to be consistent, you stop relying on fleeting bursts of inspiration and begin to tap into something far more reliable, your own capacity to show up day in and day out. Changes. The real challenge of consistency isn't about creating the perfect plan or finding the best method. It's about confronting resistance. Changes. This is the part that most people don't see when they look at successful individuals. They don't see the quiet battles that happen behind the scenes. Changes. The internal struggle between doing what needs to be done and succumbing to the temptation to take the easy road. Resistance, in its many forms, is the greatest enemy of consistency. It can be loud and insistent, whispering all sorts of excuses into your ear. You don't have enough time, you're too tired, it's not worth it, or perhaps the most insidious of all, changes. You'll do it tomorrow. Resistance thrives in the comfort zone. It feeds off the idea that we can delay, that we can put things off, that the future version of ourselves will be able to handle it. Changes. But this is where the disconnect lies. The future you won't be any different from the present you, unless you make a conscious decision today to act. This is where consistency comes in. Change, it's not about avoiding discomfort, it's about learning to push through it, to take action even when the resistance is strong, and to break the cycle of procrastination and self-doubt. Changes. One of the biggest challenges in overcoming resistance is understanding that it's not always something external. In fact, much of the resistance we face comes from within. Change, it's a psychological game, a kind of self-sabotage that makes us question our worth, our ability, and our right to succeed. We convince ourselves that we don't have what it takes, changes, and it's too late to start, or that the task at hand is just too hard. But in reality, these are just stories we tell ourselves to avoid the discomfort of doing the work. The discomfort, changes by the way, is inevitable. The resistance is not something to be eradicated, but something to be understood and worked with. Here's the key. The only way to overcome resistance is to act in spite of it. Action is the antidote to resistance. The more you push through that initial resistance, the easier it becomes. When you break through the barrier of inertia and start taking small, consistent steps, you'll begin to realize that resistance loses its power. Changes. It's not that the resistance disappears, it's that your ability to push through it grows. You create a new habit, a new normal, where you show up even when it's hard, and in doing so, changes. You diminish the hold that resistance has over you. It's also important to recognize that resistance can come in different forms. It might look like procrastination, like avoiding tasks, changes like being distracted by something more immediately gratifying. But sometimes it's more subtle. It might look like perfectionism, changes where you don't take action because you feel like you need to get everything just right. Or maybe it's the fear of failure, the worry that if you start, you won't be able to finish. In these cases, changes resistance doesn't necessarily shout at you. It whispers, convincing you that if you just wait long enough, you'll have the perfect conditions, the perfect mindset, or the perfect plan. Changes. But here's the thing, the perfect conditions don't exist. There's always going to be something in the way. The weather, the timing, the mood, the energy. Changes resistance will always find a way to make you question whether now is the right time. That's why consistency is such a powerful tool. Changes forces you to show up regardless of your feelings or circumstances. It removes the need for perfection and instead prioritizes progress. You don't have to do everything perfectly. Changes, you just have to do it consistently. And that is enough to create momentum, to break the chains of resistance. The discipline of consistency forces you to look resistance in the eye and say, changes, I don't care. It's about accepting that discomfort is part of the process and that you're willing to face it head on. When you commit to showing up, even when it's hard, changes. You change the narrative. You stop seeing resistance as an obstacle and start seeing it as a sign that you're on the right path. Every moment of resistance you overcome is a victory in itself. Changes. It's proof that you are moving forward, even when it doesn't feel like it. So, when you're faced with resistance, whether it's procrastination, fear, changes, or perfectionism, remind yourself that this is not a sign that you should stop. It's a sign that you need to push through. It's a signal that you're doing the work that matters. Changes. Every time you choose to take action despite resistance, you're making a commitment to your future self. You're building the resilience that will carry you through the challenges ahead. Changes. And that's the power of consistency. It doesn't wait for the conditions to be right. It doesn't wait for the perfect mood or the right amount of energy. It shows up regardless of how you feel, changes and gets to work. And in doing so, it transforms you, not just into someone who can do the work, but into someone who knows they can do the work, no matter what resistance comes their way. Changes resistance is inevitable, but so is your ability to overcome it. So the next time you face resistance, don't back down, embrace it. Let it remind you that you are on the path to something greater. Discipline is often misunderstood. It's not about punishing yourself or forcing rigid rules onto your life. It's not about being hard for the sake of being hard. Change is true discipline. The kind that sustains consistency over the long term is more like a quiet agreement between who you are and who you want to become. It's not loud. Changes. It doesn't scream for attention. It's subtle, intentional, almost spiritual. And yet it's one of the most powerful tools you'll ever develop. Changes. We like to think that discipline is something some people are born with, as if it's a personality trait like being neat or punctual. But in reality, it's a skill. You build it. Changes one small promise at a time. Every time you say, I'll do this and follow through, you reinforce a deeper identity, the identity of someone who follows through. Changes, that identity becomes a foundation. It becomes the place you act from rather than something you constantly need to talk yourself into. You don't need to make discipline dramatic. In fact, change, the quieter and more regular it is, the more effective it becomes. That's the trick. Discipline isn't about intensity. It's about rhythm. The same way a heartbeat isn't loud or showy, but vital and steady, it creates a pulse that life builds on. Changes. Discipline is the same. It gives your actions a steady rhythm that keeps you moving forward even when everything else feels chaotic or unclear. Changes. When people talk about forcing themselves to be consistent, what they're really saying is that they've learned to choose discipline over emotion. Not in a cold, robotic way. Changes not by numbing themselves, but by recognizing that feelings are unreliable and fleeting and often tied to fear, doubt, or discomfort. Discipline is what steps in when feelings step out. Change. It's what says, I don't feel like it today, but I'm going to do it anyway because it matters. That moment, when you act despite how you feel, is where discipline is built. Changes. That's the real training. You're not trying to become perfect. You're trying to become reliable to yourself. Think about how powerful that is to become someone you can count on. Changes. In a world that's constantly shifting with pressure coming from every direction, being able to rely on yourself becomes a kind of quiet superpower. It's not flashy. Changes. And most people won't even notice it, but you'll know. You'll feel it in the way you carry yourself, in the way you respond to challenge, changes in the way you move through discomfort without needing to justify it. And here's the deeper layer. Discipline is not about control. It's about freedom. That may sound paradoxical. Changes, but the more disciplined you are with your time, your focus, your commitments, the more freedom you actually create. Freedom to create, to rest, to grow. Freedom from chaos, from indecision, from regret. Change. Without discipline, you're constantly reacting, always responding to the moment instead of shaping it. With discipline, you become proactive, you decide what matters, changes, and you align your actions with that decision. Over time, this form of self-guided discipline becomes second nature. Change. It's not about dragging yourself through routines or beating yourself up when you miss a day. It's about creating conditions that make consistency easier. You reduce friction. You build rituals. Changes. You make the hard things automatic so they don't require constant effort. In doing so, you stop negotiating with yourself every day, and that energy can be redirected into your actual work. It's your relationships, your growth. The truth is, building discipline is uncomfortable at first, but eventually it becomes the very thing that makes life more meaningful. Changes, it's a way of anchoring yourself in what matters, especially when the world tries to pull you in 1,000 directions. So if you're waiting to feel ready, stop. Start building the muscle now. Changes start small. Do it when it's inconvenient. Do it when it's boring. Do it when no one is watching, because every time you choose discipline over comfort, you are choosing to become something stronger, something deeper, something real. We tend to glorify big wins, the dramatic transformations, the quantum leaps, the sudden rise to success. They're captivating. They make great stories. Change. But the truth is, real change almost never happens in giant sweeping movements. It happens in small, almost invisible steps, one decision at a time. Change is one action repeated often enough that it starts to shift the trajectory. This is the overlooked power of consistency. It's not about massive effort. It's about small wins that stack, that compound changes, that quietly over time become something extraordinary. There's something deeply psychological about this idea. Our brains are wired to crave completion. We love the feeling of making progress. Changes. Even something as simple as checking off a box or finishing a workout sends a signal that says you're moving forward. But we often dismiss small wins because they don't feel impressive enough. Change, they don't change the world in a day, so we wait for the perfect moment to do something bigger, more meaningful, more worthy of attention, and in the process we do nothing at all. Changes. But if you look closely, everything meaningful you've ever built started with a small win. The first time you chose to write instead of scroll. Changes. The day you went for a walk instead of staying on the couch. The moment you held your tongue in an argument and chose patience instead. These don't seem significant in the moment, but they're not meant to. Their value lies in repetition. Done once, they're a moment. Done daily, they're momentum. This is where consistency becomes a kind of art form. It teaches you to pay attention to the micro shifts, to notice when you're just a little sharper, a little stronger, a little more focused than yesterday. Over time, those shifts begin to widen the gap between who you were and who you're becoming. Not overnight, but undeniably. The beauty of small wins is that they're accessible. Change, they don't require radical change. You don't need to change your life all at once. In fact, trying to do that usually backfires. Burnout, frustration, and self-judgment tend to follow any attempt at sudden reinvention. But when you zoom in, when you focus on what's in front of you today, consistency becomes sustainable. Changes. You're no longer chasing perfection, you're cultivating progress. And that's where real growth lives. There's a deep humility in embracing the slow road. It asks you to let go of ego. Changes. To stop seeking validation through dramatic gestures and instead find meaning in the quiet discipline of doing what needs to be done, even when no one's watching. Changes. This is not about grinding for the sake of grinding. It's about learning to appreciate the invisible architecture of progress. Because what's built consistently is built to last. Changes. And here's what's fascinating. Small wins don't just build progress, they build belief. Every time you follow through on something small, you reinforce a deeper truth about yourself. Changes. You begin to believe that you're someone who follows through, someone who can change, someone who honors their word. That belief is fuel. It feeds your confidence, your discipline, changes, and your capacity to take on more. This is how small becomes big, not just in results, but in identity. You don't need a breakthrough to begin. You need a moment. Chain a single action that affirms your direction. The point is not to do everything today. The point is to do something and then keep doing it. Let it be small. Let it be imperfect. But let it be consistent. Because once you learn how to show up even in a small way every day, you become unstoppable. So instead of asking, how can I do something big? Ask, changes. What small thing can I do right now that moves me forward? And then do it, and then do it again tomorrow. Because when you learn to value the small wins, you begin to master the quiet rhythm of transformation. The real magic happens when consistency stops being something you do and starts becoming part of who you are. At that point, changes. You're no longer just forcing habits or checking boxes. You're living in alignment with an identity you've consciously chosen. Changes. That shift from behavior to identity is where transformation becomes sustainable. It's no longer a temporary sprint powered by willpower. Changes. It's a steady walk in the direction of who you want to become. So much of our struggle with consistency comes from this disconnect. Changes. We approach it like a task to complete rather than a reflection of who we are. We tell ourselves, changes. I need to start working out, or I should eat healthier, or I have to get more focused. And we might even follow through for a few days or a week. But it never really sticks. Changes. Because the identity underneath hasn't shifted. We're still seeing ourselves as someone trying to be consistent rather than someone who is consistent. It's that gap between doing and being is where most efforts fall apart. There's a deeper layer to this. The human mind craves coherence. Psychologically, we are wired to act in accordance with our identity. If you see yourself as a reliable person, you're far more likely to keep your word. If you see yourself as someone who values discipline, changes, you'll naturally avoid distractions. But if you see yourself as someone who's inconsistent, who's always starting over, then your behavior will subconsciously align with that narrative. Changes. You might not even realize it, but you're acting out a story you've been telling yourself for years. This is why consistency isn't just about building habits, it's about reshaping self-perception. Every time you choose to follow through, even in a small way, changes, you're casting a vote for the kind of person you want to be. You're not just writing a paragraph, you're becoming a writer. Changes. You're not just going for a walk, you're becoming someone who values their health. These choices may seem small on the surface, but they're identity forming. Over time, changes. They reinforce a new internal standard, and once that standard is in place, consistency becomes easier, almost automatic. It's not a battle anymore. It's just who you are. Change it. The beauty of this approach is that it removes the pressure to be perfect. You don't need flawless streaks or rigid systems. Changes. You just need enough repetition to start believing a different story about yourself, one that's rooted in action, not fantasy. Because identity is not something you uncover, it's something you build, and you build it brick by brick, day by day, through consistent action. Changes. There's something deeply liberating about no longer needing to force every decision. Once consistency becomes a reflection of your identity, there's less mental friction. You're no longer asking, changes, should I do this today? You're simply doing what someone like you does. That's the shift. The effort remains, but the resistance softens. And in that softness, you gain momentum. This is also where the work becomes more meaningful. It's no longer about just hitting a goal or building a streak. It's about honoring who you are becoming. Changes. It's about aligning your daily choices with your deeper values. That alignment creates a sense of peace, even when the work is hard. Changes. There's something grounding about acting in accordance with your truth, about knowing that each small action is an expression of your highest self. Changes. And when setbacks happen, and they will, it doesn't feel like everything is lost, because identity doesn't vanish with one missed day. If you're living from identity, change, consistency becomes a baseline, not a burden. You return to it naturally, like a compass pointing back to center. So the question isn't, how do I stay consistent? The question is, who am I choosing to become through my actions? Let your answer to that question shape your habits, your choices, your days. Let consistency be more than just a tool. Change, let it be a mirror that reflects the truth of who you are, steadily, quietly, powerfully. Because in the end, changes, you don't rise to the level of your motivation, you fall to the strength of your identity.